Hi everyone, I'm Claire Liu and I'm the CEO of Know Your Team, and I am psyched today to have a very special guest. I have Cap Watkins, who is the founder of a leadership and organizational consulting firm called Practical Works. But you might best know Cap for being the former VP of design at Buzzfeed and being a design leader at Etsy. And I know I'm a big fan of Cap's writing and his work. We recently were on I think like a design leadership late night show on YouTube, which was a lot of fun. Right. Yeah, it was my first time doing something like that, but an absolute blast. And so thrilled to ask Cap this one question about leadership, both having been a leader and then also getting to give advice to a lot of leaders. So Cap, thanks for joining me today.
No, totally. Thanks for asking me to come on.
You bet. Okay, so here's the question I've got for you that I've been asking leaders who I admire, which is, what's one thing you wish you would have learned earlier as a leader?
Just one thing?
Yeah, no. Asterisks, yeah.
Well, you and I talked this a little bit. I think I have two answers to this. I have one that's what I wish I had learned, and then something I think I've seen a lot of people that I talk to kind of learning as we're talking. Okay. I think the thing for me personally was I wish I had learned sooner how to balance out the needs of like the business with the needs of the people I was managing. I think I went into management kind of from the perspective of like I'd had some bad managers in the past. I've been treated kind of badly, and I wanted to really understand why it was so hard to be a good manager. Why it was hard to like support people that you manage, why it was hard to tell them what was going on for real, like, and that kind of thing. And then I became a manager and realized that you can do whatever you want basically and be whoever you want to be. And so I approached it though from like the kind of like doing the opposite of what my old managers had done. Sure. And so I think what kind of that meant was a lot of them were probably going at it purely from a business perspective, and that's why I had such a bad time. But that meant that by doing the opposite, I was coming at it purely from an empathetic perspective, which led me into situations, I think, where like I might have been defending my team or the people on my team, even in situations where maybe they were wrong, or maybe like what I should have been doing was helping them understand maybe like more why something was happening or why we needed to take things in a certain direction. But then I would like kind of like refuse to do that. And I didn't learn that until like I think just much later than I wish I would have.
Yes.
And it made me more effective to find that balance between business stuff and the kind of more like when to shield people and when not to.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
No, I was like, I can talk. There are a million questions I have on that. So if you want, we can start there and then circle back to the thing that you feel like people have are telling you constantly. Totally. Here's the thing that I'm learning. I mean, Cap, what you're talking about is incredibly counterintuitive. It's this idea that for so many of us as leaders, our model for leadership is usually in reaction to something that we've seen or experienced, usually something positive or something negative. In many cases, actually, this is true for myself, negative, very, very negative. And so you go, oh, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to be that person. But what you're describing is that you can actually overcompensate for that reaction. And what's counterintuitive about what you're sharing is that I think it's very popular, and rightfully so, to take a very empathetic, people-centered approach. We're supportive of that, of course, here at Know Your Team, but I think also you're saying that it can go too far, right? So tell me, well, how do you know the difference? Like, how do you know how to draw that line then?
Yeah, it's kind of tough. I think I'm kind of making this up. It's like I'm retroactively applying this logic, but I think some of it is about kind of respecting the people that you manage a little bit. Do you know what I mean? I think there's like
yes.
Like something that always helped me was when someone gave me critical feedback or explained to me why something was happening, even if I didn't like it. Like even if there was like I disagreed with it or whatever, I looking back, grew a lot through those moments where someone was actually able to like level with me, whether it was about me or about something happening to my team or whatever. And I think denying people, when you do that thing that I'm talking about, where you like just like flat out defend the people that you manage no matter what, like to the death, you're denying them, like, first of all, access to like what will help them grow into leaders. Because as a leader, you have to understand that balance. You need to understand those objectives. You need to be able to adjust and like pivot yourself around to meet those objectives or change the business. Something I think about a lot is like, if I defend my team and they all feel good, but the business fails because we didn't adjust, like, then we don't have jobs now, right? So like, what did it matter that I like defended them until the end?
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So
yes, I do.
The balance there is like, I want the business to be successful so we can continue to hire more designers, so we can continue to hire more engineers, so we can have a bigger team and like work with more people and build more cool stuff. And in order for that to happen, there are like changes sometimes to strategy or changes to teams or whatever that we need to make. And then what I need to do with people that I manage is like, not just do it, because that's the thing I think that screwed with me so much when I was like coming up, was like, no one would explain it to me. It would just happen, you know? And I think trying to say like, I will give you exposure to everything I'm learning about why we're doing this, to contextualize it for you. And now we can disagree about it or whatever. But at least you kind of understand more than you did before. And even if you don't realize it for 2 or 3 years down the road in your career, at some point you're going to be faced with a similar decision, and you're going to go like, oh, I'm familiar with this because I've been told about these things before by people when it's happened to me. And again, I think you can approach it empathetically. You don't approach it cold. You know, like, I understand when a decision is going to be unpopular, or when it's going to upset somebody or maybe frustrate them. And I think even just acknowledging that up front is very helpful. And I think there's a way to do both, I guess is what I'm saying. You don't have to like choose to completely just like off from your team emotionally. You know, you have to choose between that and like going all in on just your team. I think you can kind of like find a good between there.
Absolutely. That is a spectrum, and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive or even at odds with one another. I think one thing that I've heard a lot of leaders who I've interviewed over the past few years, you know, talk about is that, yes, when you optimize for your team to feel good, then perhaps the business suffers. But at the same time, people feel, when people feel good, they actually perform better. So the business performs better at the same time. So I always have found that to be such an interesting paradox. So, you know, I always wonder, in your opinion, Cap, you know, if you were sort of put on the spot right now and asked, like, which do you put first, right? Do you put the business results first? Do you put how people are feeling about how to achieve those results first? Or is that even the wrong question? And like you were saying, is there really just truly a spectrum?
If it came down to it, I think you put the business results first. I mean, like, you have to. And I think the way that it manifests itself towards your team is, like, I think you need to get them to buy into it too. It can't just be that, like, I'm sitting there going, like, the business results matter to me. Like, it has to be that I've done the work over time and hired people who care about the business we're creating. This is something I talk to people about when I'm hiring them, is, like, what is the business we're in? Like, what does success look like for us? To make sure they understand what they're getting into, right? So, like, at Etsy, it's like, when Etsy sells things, like, our sellers make money, Etsy makes money, right? That's awesome. Like, I think that's a cool mission. Like, a huge portion of that money goes directly to sellers. It feels good, right? And then you come to Etsy and it's like, oh, well, we're doing work that maybe I think is kind of boring. And it's like, well, in those moments, I would like you to be able to go like, well, objectively, though, I'm aligned with this entire organization, and the work I'm doing does feed into this, right into this work. Or when the company shuts down a project because it isn't being that successful, going like, well, I don't want us working on stuff that doesn't help the people, our customers, right? So I think trying to get your team hyper-aligned on business objectives makes those conversations simpler.
Yes.
And again, it doesn't have to divorce the empathy at all. Like, I understand it sucks. Like, things change sucks, period.
Totally.
Forever, like, no matter what, and so I think there's it's not even a balance. It's just trying to get everybody aligned on the same goal in the end. And so then, like, your goal isn't your one little thing you're working on. It's like this bigger objective that, like, we're all feeding into, you know?
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. I think if someone asked me this question, I would say absolutely. You know, you have to focus on the results first because that's kind of the reason you're there as the leader, right?
Right. That's what the money's for.
Well, it's to achieve the goal. It's like, you know, you're not, I mean, to be very blunt, you know, you're not there to be people's cheerleaders or their friend or their family or spouse. You know, you're trying to help them achieve this goal. And I think because of that, you want them to feel connected to the work, understand, you know, how their work fits into the bigger picture. You know, you want to approach things from empathy because it actually helps you get the results better, and the person feels good when they do achieve the results. So I think it's I'm right with you, and I think it sometimes becomes blurry when you have to tell someone something they don't want to hear, or you have to make a difficult decision, or you're not allowed, you can't protect someone from something that they might not want to be exposed to. I guess for you, Cap, do you notice, or actually, let me ask this. So one thing that you mentioned is how that this insight has developed because of, again, this reaction to a bad boss. In the work that you've been doing in advising different leaders, how much of an influence have you noticed that previous bosses have had on the way people choose to lead? This is something I've been really interested in lately. Is this something that happens a lot, do you think?
I think it does. Like you said earlier, I think it happens in both directions.
Yeah.
You know, I know people who are mirroring behavior that they've seen that they agree with or align with. Even like people who become the new head or whatever.
Yes.
Structuring their teams in ways that they're familiar with. Like that's like a very straightforward example. Even if like the organization they are in is not necessarily like conducive to that particular like way they want to set it up. Do you know what I mean?
I do. Yeah.
And I think that kind of like, that's a very new manager type thing where it's like, I'm being handed this thing and like, well, I'm going to lean on what I know from the past because it feels comfortable to me, something that worked for me. But I think as you, like, hopefully, as we all grow and like evolve in these roles, like we start to get more and more tools to like, I think it's at a point where you're lacking the tools. All you have is experience. And so you're leaning on those experiences either in the positive or negative.
Yes.
And then over time, developing the tools so you're not running purely off of instinct or off of a singular experience you had.
Absolutely.
Is kind of what I typically have seen.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on. That's something that I've noticed as well with the leaders that we've worked with. And what I'm curious to know, and I'm sure everyone who's watching this is curious to know, is so how do you sort of self-correct for that tendency? If you're leaning on experience instead of the tools and the frameworks, perhaps, you know, that you learn and pick up over time or from talking to people or et cetera, what advice do you have for new managers who might be overly biased by just their prior exposure to leadership?
Well, I think the thing that helped me a lot is assuming I might be wrong. It's very helpful.
Yes.
So when I started at Buzzfeed, I had never like run an entire design team before, like on my own.
Yes.
Like I had been like a part of a management team previously. I had people to lean on. We had a boss who ran the whole design team. Like we had a good, like, I was protected. I had my bubble of influence, but that was it. Mm-hmm. And so coming in, I was leaning on a lot of my past experiences. Like I knew that a lot of the things I was about to implement on this new team were going to be things that I had seen or done in the past. Like, because I just didn't know.
Yeah.
And I remember the first day or my first week, I was giving a presentation to the team about who I was, to kind of like reduce the fear factor a little bit. Sure. And I was going like, here's what I believe, here's my like kind of philosophical, like here are the three things philosophically I feel very aligned about. And then at the end, I was like, and here's the deal, we're going to try some stuff. Like we're going to experiment with some things. It may make people uncomfortable. It may be different. And all I'm asking is for people to, number one, try, and number two, tell me what's not working as soon as possible. Like, because if it's not working or something's wrong, like the sooner I know, and I'm going to be wrong, I'm a person, like with limited experiences, you know, like if something's not working or wrong or whatever, like the faster I know, the faster I'm willing to change it. And I think that's the thing a lot of people don't feel like they can do. As leaders or managers, they feel like they have to own the decision. They have to see it through. They have to kind of like forge the team into their way of thinking, or way of doing things. And I feel like that's that leads into situations where you're just being way too brittle and you're not learning because you're not able to listen or see, and you're not inviting that sort of criticism. And so I feel like that helped a lot, because people would really quickly raise their hands to tell me, like for instance, like our team grew and the critique structure broke, and like I didn't notice, you know, like I kind of noticed, but I didn't know how like urgent it was. And then somebody came to me and they're like, this doesn't feel like it's that effective anymore. And like I was like, okay, so like let's do something about it. And like, you know, we all talked and like worked on it and fixed it, you know?
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that's just a thing you need to be able to get to, is a place where you're open to criticism and you're like inviting it regularly, even from people who aren't above you or your peers, just absolutely. So you can like start to learn.
Right. No, that progress, I mean, it doesn't come without literally, like you said, assuming that maybe a lot of the assumptions that you have up front are wrong. So I think that's a brilliant insight, Cap. So I want to switch gears a little bit. You mentioned at the start of this little chat that you also have noticed something recurring from all the clients that you have, the things that they wished they would have learned earlier. I'd love to hear what that is, or maybe many things.
Yeah, I think the thing that stuck out to me a lot recently, I've been meaning to write about it, but I've had a lot of people talking to me about kind of process stuff, right? So like either like writing career tracks for their team, or coming up with a way of recruiting quickly and efficiently, or experimenting with design critique structures or product development, ways of doing product development. Mm-hmm. And I had someone ask me recently, so this is the example I use, is someone asked me recently that I had worked with them before a long time ago. Okay. And this was back when I'd been developing a reputation at Etsy of like being a really good recruiter. I recruited really fast. I recruited really well. And I kind of ran the process and ran all the sourcing and stuff. And this person was asking me, because they were about to start embarking on their own recruiting adventure for the first time. And they were like, so what was the trick? Like, how did you do it so fast? Like, how did that happen? And I was like, well, I sat down on my desk for hours a day and I scoured the internet and I wrote a ton of emails and I kept up with all those emails and I like had them in a Google Doc, and I just like started to describe the work involved. And the person was like, that can't be true. That just can't be true. And I was like, that is true. That is what it takes to like, to do it really fast and to do it really well. Like, yes, I'm better at it now than I was when I started doing it, but it took a ton of work. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with career tracks. I think like I've seen a few times like people like taking either my career track or career track that I've open sourced or a career track from somewhere else and just like kind of plopping it into their organization. And it's not working, right? It like doesn't work as well as it should. Sure. And I think there's a lot of resources out there, and probably now more than there's ever been, for like all of this kind of stuff. Like managers are sharing more than they've ever shared. I think this is great. It's a really good thing. But there's this thing that I think people miss, which is it takes a lot of work to like make it right and to understand why something's happening and how to do it well. And that's something that I've really been blowing people's minds with lately, is like that career track that's open sourced online was in development for 3 years. And like it got iterated on every year, like multiple times, yes. Like, and tons of feedback, and that's why it's where it's at. And I still don't think it's very good. You know what I mean? Like I think it's fine. Like right. We worked on it really hard. I think it worked for us. But would I use it again? I don't know. Like I might like change it a lot, depending on the situation. And I feel like this kind of like taking of resources and shortcutting is a thing that I feel like we could do less of. And I think kind of almost like it's kind of the thing we were talking about earlier, where it kind of harms your progress as a manager or leader to take that stuff verbatim without really seriously sitting down and going like, what do I think about this?
Totally.
Which kind of like on the side has another like side to it, which is I think like a lot of leaders I've talked to have never been challenged to think about what their philosophy is. And this is why these things happen. And mm-hmm. I think like this is like I said, when I started at Buzzfeed, I had a deck that I put together, and I'm like, here are the 3 things you're going to hear from me until I'm gone, like forever. Okay. And it's like transparency, collaboration, and like cross-disciplinary skill sets. Like those are the 3 things, and I'm not letting those go. That's my leadership philosophy, and like you should just know that going in, that's how I make decisions. And like there's a lot of room there. You can do a lot of stuff within that purview. There's a lot of stuff outside of that has nothing to do with that. But like a lot of people don't think about that at all. It's very intuitive. They're doing it without really saying it.
It's reactionary.
And I think a lot. Yeah. Right. And I think, you know, people being, again, very intentional about who am I as a leader? What does that mean for things like career tracks? What does it mean for things like reviews? What does it mean for how we recruit? Like all of that, like, kind of comes back to who am I as a manager? And that's the thing a lot of people struggle with. And like, I think maybe don't even spend that much time on. And I think it's really important.
Absolutely. Well, I think all of us are, as humans, you know, suckers for recipes and quick paths to success. So anytime that you see, oh, here's an open source career track, or oh, here's what, you know, what worked at this person, you sort of copy and paste it and sort of cross your fingers that it works. And your point is, you know what, do the work, and most importantly, do the self-reflection to figure out what you stand for, what matters to you as a leader, and how, based off of that, you want to make decisions going forward. So I guess my last question for you here then, Cap, is how do you know what you stand for as a leader? How do you go about that process? Or for yourself, like when you were building that deck, right? What went into that? That's a
big question. I feel like my therapist will have a better answer to it than I'm going to. I think a lot of actually talking about my therapist. She told me something once, which was that her job with me and a lot of people she works with were to help people understand who they are better. That is like the human condition. That like we are always trying to, like, we should all be trying to constantly understand ourselves just a little bit better. And when I wrote that deck, for instance, like the goal of the deck was to kind of demystify people, so there wouldn't have to be like, you know, confusion about what my expectations were. They could expect certain things from me. I wanted them to understand, right? So that there wasn't a lot of confusion or like rumor. And so I sat down and had to write it for that reason. It's not like I sat down and was like, what's my philosophy? Let me just like nail that down today. You know?
I did in 30 minutes, yeah.
Right. But I think like going through that process of like, I've seen people also get caught up a lot in like, what is this team now? And so like, that's my philosophy, kind of like that, like they kind of back it out from what's happening currently. And I got lucky that it was like a fresh start for me. I had no idea what it was like. And so I didn't have to care. I had no baggage, right? But for a lot of people, they're in an org, they're working a certain way, and they're like, well, those are my values, right? They must be. And it's actually not. So I always think about stuff like, if you're in an org right now, like if you could snap your fingers and change anything, what would it be? Or if someone were trying to snap their fingers and take something and you were going to lay down on the tracks in front of it, what would that be?
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Start to really think about like, what are your like non-negotiables, right? So it's like, if I believe that like, you know, design should be shared broadly forever inside of a company, like, and if that ever stopped, I wouldn't want to work there anymore. Like, that's good to know. I should write that down somewhere, you know, and because that's actually how I'm making decisions, and I should be like, again, intentional about it. I read something once, I don't remember where, but they're talking about how people watch what you do and not what you say, you know? So like, I know people who get up in front of their org and they're like, it's really important to take our time and just make sure we're shipping great products to customers. And then like 2 weeks later, like, why didn't we ship this yet? Do you know what I mean? Like they actually send the email. It's like, why didn't this go out yet? And you're like, well, no one's listening to your all hands presentation. Like they're listening to that. Like, and so you got to know what that is and own it and like write it down somewhere and be like, this is who I again, understand yourself. Like, who am I? What do I value? Like, what would I quit a job over? What would I take a job for? You know, and then like, that's it. You got it. Like, that's the start anyway of like what those values would be.
I absolutely love that. I think, you know, letting go of baggage helps sort of frame and clear perspective to see things as they are. I think defining what those non-negotiables are, and I love the different questions that you posed, are in essence what, you know, what values are, the things that are sort of immutable that shape how you do your work, how you view your work. And then I think your point about the things that you consistently act on are often the things that you are. And so it's, I think even the simple reflection of going, what are the things that people would just say that I don't change about, like, right, that I'm just always doing, that I just habitually do. Oftentimes, you can trace this back and go, I think I'm actually pretty patient, or maybe I'm impatient, but it's the actions that reveal who you are, to your point. So I think,
you have to examine that, and if you may not like that thing, right? It may be that like maybe I find out by doing that introspection I am impatient, and that's not really a value. I maybe should, I know deep down that's bad.
Yeah.
But knowing that that's even possible means that while I'm working on it, it's okay to receive feedback, and I'm more open to being someone criticizing me about it, and I can say yes, that is true.
Yes.
Like there are times that I'm impatient. That is one of my things that I have trouble with.
Right.
And I'm working on it.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? It makes you a lot more receptive, I think, to those
Absolutely.
things.
And sometimes what is perceived as negative are in fact positives as well. Being impatient can be a great catalyst for getting things done and having a sense of urgency and just shipping things and not being held back by just things being perfect. And so I think either way, just figuring out what is actually true instead of what you want to be true is helpful.
Yeah, the fascinating thing to me, what I've realized is, I realized this a long time ago during someone was giving me critical feedback.
Yeah.
And I realized it was the exact opposite side of the positive feedback I was receiving.
Yeah.
So it was on the one hand, everyone at this company really loved how they could always trust that they knew what I was saying was my actual opinion. They liked that when I said something, I was shooting straight. They didn't have to worry. No bureaucracy, no politics, no bullshit. So then the opposite side of that was not everyone always wants to know what I think.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I had a lot of opinions.
Right.
But were they all useful? No. And so I think I have noticed this in ever since then, every review I've ever seen for anybody, everyone's strengths are also what holds them back a little.
Totally.
Because it just has that opposite effect just a little. And I think a lot of the work people do or should think about doing is you can't really change that con exists. It's not I can change that I'm going to have opinions about stuff, right?
Sure.
But I can minimize the points at which that could be a negative. I can start to try to hack my way around I have an opinion, but maybe I just won't say anything because it doesn't seem that useful in this meeting. But if it is useful, I'll find out eventually.
Right.
And then I can bring it there, right?
Right.
But I feel a lot of people feel they are in this place where it's not, the feedback's not fair, right? Because if I do that, then I can't be doing the thing that everyone loves about me, And it's right. That's actually not true. It's just a lot about modulation and trying to minimize the risky scenarios for the thing you're really good at.
Absolutely. I think that nuance and awareness that comes with understanding that your greatest strength is also many times your greatest weakness. It's something I feel I learn more and more as a leader is so key, and to adjust, like you said, to adjust and not just say, oh, this is my strength and I have to just go all in on it. So I think that's wonderful wisdom. Yeah.
Well, the saddest part is to go back to the first thing about shortcuts and stuff. There is.
Yeah.
As a manager, I found there is no shortcut to learning that. It is
yes.
a process that people must go through, and you can tell them as many times as you want that is what's happening, and they don't believe you.
Yes.
And then eventually it becomes clear. You know what I mean? It's just it's just really, it's I think a lot of managers hope that they can progress the human condition by helping people not do the dumb things I did.
Right.
When I was coming up as a designer, can't do it. They still throw their hands on that stove, and they're God, it hurts. And you're yep.
Yep.
That's
no,
true. I do that.
I think the most powerful way to learn anything, this is true of any skill, is just to do it and to actually to get burned yourself. And self-delusion is the most powerful fog. And so no one entirely eludes it, but we sure as can try. And I love the helpful tips that you shared on how to do that. So Cap, thank you so much for chatting with me today. It's been a blast to have you.
No problem. Totally.
Cool. Thanks.